Well, good evening. If you're in the Zoom room, you're here to attend the community workshop on the New Market Industrial Campus development, proposed development. I'm going to give just a couple of minutes for people to sign in before we get started. Okay. And my name is Ann Cook. I'm the communications manager for the city of Tumwater, and our community development director, Mike Matlock, and I will be facilitating this community workshop. We are so glad that you're here this evening. First off, our city administrator, John Doan, and Mayor Pete Kmet have some opening remarks. And so I'd like to introduce first John Doan.
You're on mute there, John.
I just wanted to get that out really early in the meeting. So we've had one mute incident going on. Thank you, Anne, for that introduction. Thank you all for joining us on this evening for our virtual public workshop. We're here to talk about a lease option between Pantone, which is a development company, and the Port of Olympia to lease approximately 200 acres of land in the New Market Industrial Campus for the eventual development of about 2.5 million square feet of industrial uses over a period of a number of years. The Port and the city have agreed to begin discussions around a development agreement to address concerns expressed by a number of community members. That draft development agreement would be presented to the City Council and to the Port Commission for their consideration. It's important to keep in mind that at this point, first off, there is no draft of that development agreement. There's no document out there that we've all been able to look at. There's no specific end users that have been identified, and Pantone has not submitted any permit applications. So this is a sort of unique thing. Usually developments come in, they make a proposal to the city, and then there's a public process that invites input about that development. This is unique because really in advance of any development proposal, there was public participation in that the port had to approve the lease option, and then engaged in a conversation about what a development agreement could look like between the city and the port, trying to address some very big sort of overarching issues. So to an extent, we've created a thing without having ever had a process on how to do that. And so if this seems a little unusual compared to other types of processes of permit involvement that people have had, it is different. It absolutely is. And so we would ask for everyone's grace and patience as we sort of work through this thing that we're working on, but also grace and patience as we work through the technology. This is a very new kind of public workshop we have going on here. We're trying as best we can to find a venue that, in light of pandemics and other challenges that we have, to try to figure out how we can get input from the community and answer questions and hear from folks. And so, you know, you may hear a lot of, we just don't know yet, particularly from the planning staff, because we just don't know a lot of the details about this particular development. But we'll also do our best in sort of working through the technology. I know all of us are in different places, trying to sort of figure this out. And it's not as easy as an in-person workshop where we could sort of point to each other to find answers to questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Mayor Kmet, who in turn then will bring it back to Anne, who is our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone. Good to see that we've got a good turnout here this evening. I see close to 50 people signed up. That's great. and I hope we can use this as an opportunity to get some information about what the proposal is out to you, as well as try to answer questions to the best degree that we can. As John said, our authority as a city in land use is somewhat limited in terms of we pretty much are limited to how we use zoning to define the types of land uses that are allowed within a given area. And then beyond that, of course, we have development regulations, tree preservation requirements, stormwater requirements, standards for what the streets need to look like, and those sorts of things. What we heard from the community and the council discussed was that really we had concerns beyond those sort of traditional city role in development. And we were hoping that the port would agree, and they have, to try and address some of those concerns. You'll hear, I think, through Sam's presentation tonight about how the port is proposing to address those concerns. And so I'll try and hold off on that. We're really here again for you to learn a little bit more about the concept that we're talking about here and some of the major elements. Again, there is no development agreement yet. When there is a development agreement, the city will have to hold a public hearing on that. And so we'll provide an opportunity for folks to provide that next level of detailed comment. But this meeting tonight is really intended to get at the big concepts. I know there are some elected officials signed in here, and I would ask that we try to, as elected officials, we try and limit our comments on this, because we're really here to listen tonight to what the public has to say. Having said that, I'll turn it back over to Ann Cook, and she'll describe how this evening's going to go in more detail to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Komet and Administrator Doan. As both of them said, we're doing this virtually. You're actually our first virtual community workshop, so thank you for testing this format with us. Tonight we have two presentations, and we have what we call some subject matter experts. So if you were in an in-person workshop, you might speak with Mike Matlock. Mike, if you can give a wave, he's our Director of Community Development. You might also speak with Brad Medrud, our Planning Manager, or Brandon Hicks, our Transportation and Engineering Services Director. Is that, I think I got most of it, Brad or Brandon. So we will have first two presentations, one by Community Development Director Mike Matlock, and the second presentation by the Executive Director of the Port of Olympia, Sam Gibney. If you've noticed, we have the chat function open, and we invite you to enter your questions into the chat during the presentations, before the presentation, or after. Our three subject matter experts and other city or port staff will do their best to respond to the questions in the chat box. And after both presentations, we will have some time to do some live questions. And we're going to try to get the best use out of this hour tonight. This is a beautiful summer night. So, Mike, if you're ready to begin your presentation, I'll mute. How's that?
I am. Thank you, Ann. And if you could maybe do me a favor, Ann, and share my screen that I wanted to show you, or the slide I wanted to show, because I'm discovering I'm at the ragged edge of my technical prowess here. So that would be great if you can do that. So I'd like to talk just a little bit tonight. Actually, Mayor Komet and John did a really good primer on a lot of the development issues and how this process is going to work already. They're both pros with this. But as they've mentioned, we do not have a development proposal in at this time. And the city's role is primarily to act as an approval authority for development permits. And we don't have any of those yet to even review or look at. So the proposal that Sam is going to show you tonight is located on port property, obviously, and it's also entirely within the airport related industrial zone. And that zone is what you would expect. It allows a fairly wide variety of both commercial and industrial uses. The conceptual plans that we have so far really indicate that all the uses that are anticipated are what we call permitted uses within the ARI zone. The ARI zone in this area has actually been in place on this property since 1995. And prior to that, it was in a different industrial zone. So it's been industrially zoned for some time. Those categories are placed there through a process by the city council as our elected officials. They go through a process of comprehensive planning and then a regulatory regime they put in place. And that really identifies what are permitted uses and all the detailed regulations that staff then use to apply in permit review. So when the council is working through adoption of those plans and zoning code options like they did in 1995 in this instance, they are really, it's called a legislative action. They're very free to take citizen input in any way that it can come in. They'll do public hearings, they'll do public meetings. You can run into them at the coffee shop and talk to them. You can run into them at the grocery store and talk to them. All is free and clear in terms of discussions with the public at that stage. After those plans and regulations are put in place, there's still opportunities for public comment, but that changes shape a little bit. With permitted uses, for example, we don't have any public hearings per se at that point. It's a staff review, and we take public comments, but our opportunities for changing zoning really are non-existent at that point. So an example would be, or an analogy would be, if I own a lot in a residential zone and I want to build a house on it, we're not going to go to all my neighbors and ask them if it's okay if I build a house there. It's assumed that houses are going to go there. And some of those neighbors, maybe they'd rather have the trees that are there, the open space that are there. They might say no if we were to ask, but we're not asking at that point because there's an expectation that's going to happen. And it allows the property owner to have a reasonable expectation of what's going to happen and some predictability. So there are, as I mentioned, there are opportunities for public comment. Specifically, there's 2 of them. Once we have a complete application in other words, when we get to the point where we've got everything we think we need to begin a review of a proposal, we'll issue what we call a notice of application. And that's a notice that just goes out and it says, this is what the proposal is, this is where it is, this is how big it is. And if you'd like to provide comments to us as staff, you have a 14-day period to do that. And then we can take those comments and we can consider those as we do our permit review. After that period's complete, there's one other opportunity, and that's through State Environmental Policy Act review. And in that, we'll review an environmental checklist and we'll issue a SEPA determination on what we think the impacts are going to be on the environment from the proposal that's in front of us. And again, there's a 14-day comment period on that as well. And we'll take comments on that before we issue a final declaration on what we think is going to happen with the environment as a result of the proposal. So if and when we do get a permit application for a specific development, we require a whole host of detailed studies and analysis. We'll look at a whole bunch of different things here. We'll look at traffic. We'll look at stormwater and high groundwater. We'll look at any critical or sensitive areas if they're located on the property. We'll look at, of course, endangered species in this part of Tumwater. We'll look at our tree protection standards and apply those. And as I mentioned already, we'll look at environmental review. So we'll really apply a whole host of really robust regulatory regime here. And typically what we find is we've got everything pretty well covered in those regulations. Occasionally, something will come up that is not covered in that regime. And if that happens, then we'll use the State Environmental Policy Act to kind of bat as clean up there and hit anything that our regulations may have missed, which is really, it used to happen quite a bit years ago. It very rarely happens anymore that we actually encounter that. And then after we do all that, we'll require what we call condition the permit. We'll require a number of mitigation measures for all those items that I just mentioned before we issue any permit approval to mitigate any impacts that we see as a result of all this review. So we've included our contact information, I think, in the chat, and if we haven't, we will. So what we can do tonight is anyone who's interested, we can get you on our mailing list. And when we get to a point with any specific development, and these will likely come in phases too, if they occur. And so we just go through the same process every time. So if you would like to be on those mailing lists, we can let you know when we do a notice of application and when we do SEPA review on any individual development. And that's really just kind of a quick overview of what you can expect with permit review, just generally and in particular for these properties as well. So that's really what I have to share, and I'll turn it back over to you, Ann.
Thank you, Mike. I think there's a couple of questions there in the chat that you might be responding to at the end of the presentations. And I think we're now ready to see a presentation from the Port of Olympia. I'll give a little more information about what's proposed and probably answer some questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So Executive Director Gibney, are you ready to share your screen?
I am, thank you. So I'm gonna share now. And can everyone see that? Great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to especially thank the staff of the City of Tumwater for working with us to host this meeting this evening, and really appreciate that introduction of the kind of development review process by Mike there. So I am Sam Gibney. I'm the Executive Director of the Port of Olympia. And I'd like to always first start my presentations by explaining what the port is. And we are what's called a special purpose district of local government. And our primary mission is to foster economic development. We're often called the platypus of local governments, in that we operate a little differently, in that we earn about 2/3 of our revenue in a very competitive marketplace. So while we are absolutely a local government and we are beholden to all those requirements of serving our citizens and being transparent, making our decisions in the light of day, and returning a real value to the citizens, we do operate somewhat as a more private enterprise would do, in that we operate in that in a very competitive marketplace and earn our income. And so as we look to, so we're always looking at what is kind of akin to a triple bottom line approach. This is from our strategic plan, and we have 3 main focus areas of creating economic opportunities, stewarding our community assets, and really committing to environmental stewardship. So as we look at projects and how we conduct our business, we always keep these 3 things in mind. And we believe that this development proposal really does fulfill our mission while balancing those activities with our values. We do operate, we are a form of government that can earn a surplus, and we can then take that surplus and reinvest it into new activities or into maintaining our assets and community amenities. For those of you that are familiar with downtown, places such as Port Plaza or the Billy Frank Jr. Trail are things that we can then help and provide to the community at no cost, and use our surpluses to help shepherd those over time. We just finished a very comprehensive community outreach process called Vision 2050. This community plan was accepted by the Port Commission in late 2019. It was a very sophisticated piece of work that did tremendous outreach into the community, asking the basic question of what are the priorities and what would you like to see the Port investing in as we fulfill our mission over the next 30 years. So we used this document that was created by and distilling down like over 10,000 comments. We used 27 different community leaders to be advisors to us, including Administrator Doan was on that advisory committee, and really helped to set us with some very concrete tasks and goals, but creating this overall vision of what we'd like to, the community would like to see in the next 30 years. To that end, one of the things that we have looked at in developing the new market area is some of the task and goals is really to work with our partners to respond to economic activities, put the new market properties to better beneficial use, and really look for opportunities to expand into manufacturing, logistics, and businesses of those types. So in this effort to fulfill our mission and implement the Vision 2050, we began turning to the marketplace and looking for interested developers that would be aligned with those goals. Interest was shown by Panattoni Development Company, and we began discussions on a lease option agreement in early 2020. We all know kind of what happened in February and March there, where the world changed fundamentally, but we kept at it and kept engaging with them, and eventually brought back to our commission, the Port Commission, a option for leasing 200 acres in this area. And I'll have you a little bit more detail on that. This graphic to the right here, the yellow outlined area, that is what we call our new market industrial campus. And as Mike mentioned earlier, this is zone airport related industrial. This purple area is the outline of the lease option agreement. And to orient you, I hope you can see my cursor. This Tumwater Boulevard up here, 83rd to the south. This kind of little, this is Kimmy Street that comes down here. And the little island here in the middle is the school district bus barn, and Center Street down here to the right. The basic tenets of the lease option agreement is, first of all, that we told the developer we really want you to propose developments that are consistent with Tumwater, the airport related industrial zoning, and meets the existing code and regulations. We do have a 10-year option with them. We've agreed to a lease template. The base year for the lease of the property is 55 years, plus there are some additional options. That gives the developer the ability to invest in building the buildings, or and then leasing them out, or whatever their model is, and then has adequate time for them to recoup their investment. We've also committed, the port has committed to working with the city of Tumwater to complete the habitat conservation plan within 2 years. That timeline is currently being revised. We're in close contact with the city and working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on that. We don't know exactly when that's going to be approved, but progress is still being made. I will point out on this graphic over here, this yellow line outlines also what is called the, and Mike, you correct me if I'm mislabeling this, the warehouse overlay. And this is it shows up in the zoning code and depicts where warehouse distribution centers are permitted. So as John mentioned, we did hear both through, we've had quite a bit of public process already on this, both with meetings at the port, as well as we've attended a couple of different meetings with Tumwater City Council. We've had lots of input through emails and letters and various modalities. We've kind of, synthesize those down to a list of things that we think thought that we could be responsive to. And and I'll go through these, and some of them, most of these would be reflected in the development agreement. Some of them are in commitments, so it won't necessarily be written into the development agreement, but will be a commitment on the port's part. And I'll point those out along the way. So first is that all the uses and buildings will meet the current zoning and code. And again, we really thought that was important. We've been very straightforward with the developer along the way of going, we have this existing code. We're not going to ask for variances or things like that. And they've said that's great. We can we have opportunities in the marketplace that will fit well within the existing code and regulations. We also then heard that and thought that it'd be better suited to have a mix of buildings sizes to allow for a diversity of businesses. And I'll get to a conceptual site layout here that will show that. We also have offered to limit the warehouse overlay east of Center Street, and so we've kind of voluntarily said, we won't try to do any warehouses east of Center Street. That we would be in full compliance with tree retention and mitigation and provide tree buffer areas. We'd also provide recreational trail for bikes and pedestrians, and to really try to create a campus-like setting with tree buffers along the street, especially Center Street. For stormwater management, Mayor Komet has been especially helpful on this, and it also aligns with expectations from the Federal Aviation Administration, is that to avoid open water ponds, airports typically want to avoid those too, because they tend to attract birds, which don't necessarily mix well with an airport. We also heard from the community is that there's concern about increased truck traffic going past the middle school, in particular to the south. So the developer has proposed a layout that would direct truck traffic to the north, and then it would be going onto I-5 from Tumwater Boulevard. Also looking to protect the city wells and the wellhead protection area, that any type of utility impacted relocations, that those costs would be borne by the port and the developer. And this is one of the ones where we won't necessarily offer this in the development agreement, but the port will make a commitment to advocate for continued use by the Capital Little League, a property that's not within the lease option agreement, but is close by. And I think most people are familiar with those Little League fields. And then also that we would provide with a couple of different performance thresholds in there of 10 acres along Center Street for Tumwater to use as a development of a community center. So again, just in summary, what we have agreed to, and kind of in principle with staff, and understanding that we have been talking staff to staff, then when we will take it back to our respective councils and commission for their consideration. But the basic terms of the agreement is that the zoning regulations would be vested for 20 years. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, in essence, what that means is that even if there is a change in zoning at a later date, that the area that is affected by this development agreement, it would be, those applications would be judged by the existing zoning that's in place at the time that it's signed. That again, those proposed uses are consistent with Tumwater code, that we would route traffic internal to the development and then to the north, that we would designate tree buffer and retainage areas, that there would be a dedication of and actual construction of a multi-use trail, and those would be maintained over the course of the development. Then again, for what the port will, and this will not necessarily be part of the development agreement, but we'll continue to work with Secretary of State and other really important developments that I think both the city of Tumwater and the port consider important. That the community center property of 10 acres would be provided with a couple thresholds in there, and that the international wood products expansion and existing business will be supported. So I want to take a couple minutes to walk you through this graphic. And again, hopefully you can see my cursor. Again, orienting you, this is Tumwater Boulevard, Center Street down here. You can see there is a mix of proposed building sites. Again, I have to emphasize that these are conceptual in nature and they're not necessarily tied to any particular application, though the developer is seeing interest, and I will point out one of those here in a couple of slides. There is a tree retention area designated both down right here, kind of in the middle, as well as along 83rd, and again up here along, and I think that's 75th Street. There will also be additional tree plantings and things throughout the campus. This yellow area is the area that we have designated that once there has been 100 acres leased by Panattoni, that then this property would be provided to the city for their development of a community center or perhaps some other city designated use. Okay, I think that's about, oh, and also then the provision of a trail. We have it located here. Again, this is very conceptual, how these actually connect out to existing pedestrian facilities and things. Those will remain to be designed, but in essence, we would have it along the western boundary of the development. You can see also that the roads, these are the internal roads. They will be tree lined, that there will be this kind of somewhat circular pattern in here with traffic coming and going out onto Center Street and then heading to the north. This portion of Kimmy Street down here would remain in place, and that is obviously right in front of the Bush Middle School. It would no longer be connected to the rest of Kimmy Street, thereby ensuring that truck traffic could not continue on Kimmy Street and go past the middle school. So what might this look like? We had the Panattoni do some conceptual renderings. This is if you are turning off Tumwater Boulevard and looking south along Center Street. You can see we're imagining that there would definitely be trees retained as well as additional plantings along the street. This is some of the imagined scale of the buildings, and you can see there's quite a nice tree buffer and screening of the buildings. This would be the location of the community center. So you can see that we believe that we can really create the feel of having a civic and public orientation to Center Street, while then having the more industrial areas off over here to the west in the development. Also looking at a lot of rain gardens, those type of stormwater treatment facilities that Mayor Komet has imagined. So again, conceptual in nature, but really thought it was important to have people imagine what Center Street could look like. Then we also want to talk about the economic impact from this development. Again, looking at our mission, which is economic development and the creation of jobs. We have an estimate that between 1,750 and 2,600 direct full-time jobs will be created at full build out. That there would be between 124 and 163 million dollars in new wages and 354 million in total economic production. Then we look at our estimations of annual tax benefits to the various jurisdictions, and you can see there Tumwater School District coming in and with almost $1.6 million of additional annual taxes at full build out. Other ones in there, including City of Tumwater. This is not completely comprehensive of all the taxes. This is based upon the building valuation. So just for the building. We also then looked at the taxes that could be generated from the construction of the buildings, and that have estimated that over $23 million in state and local taxes would be created as a result of the construction of the buildings. One of the things that certainly, and I'll go back to this slide with Tumwater school districts and why, and this is my personal opinion, that I believe that having a mix of industrial lands is important in a community, is that industrial lands can provide this type of benefit in increasing the tax revenues for school districts, but they don't necessarily come along kind of one for one with potential students. So it doesn't necessarily put a strain on the school system for, you build a house, but it comes with more kids. So it is a way for that I believe the community helps create wealth for itself, is having a good mix of industrial lands. And I think that this slide demonstrates that. I wanted to zero in on a couple opportunities that have presented themselves. And so again, orienting you to Center Street over here on the eastern part, more towards the south, what is being labeled as Building E. The developer has shared with us that they have a manufacturer that is looking to build a facility here, and that this would be one of the first developments that would happen. This, as well as the expansion of international wood products, I think shows the commitment of having this mix of uses, having manufacturing and really helping to support a small local business. As the first couple developments within this area is demonstrates that we really are trying to bring this mix in. If we are successful, if the developer is successful with this, permitting on this could begin pretty soon, as we've actually had a survey done of it, and it appears that there are no gopher impacts on this particular piece of the property. So what we've done so far and what are the next steps? We've had a Port Commission advisory on this topic on July 12th. We followed that very shortly with a Tumwater City Council discussion on the next day. We're now conducting this public workshop. We'll be incorporating feedback as John and Mike have both mentioned. We are working on the particular language of the development agreement. In fact, I think it's probably going to be going to the city tomorrow for its review. We'll then be taking it back to the Port Commission first for its consideration. If it's approved there, then it will be sent to the city for its consideration. And I believe that also includes a public hearing on it. And so Port Commission action is scheduled for, in consideration is scheduled for August 23rd. And the Tumwater City Council hearing and action, and I'm going to be deferential here and say, that they've not committed to a date, but we have been talking about September. And with that, I'm happy. I'll turn it back over to Ann, and if you want to have questions or how you want to proceed from here.
Well, thank you. And I do want to apologize. Executive Director Debney, you have a staff member here that we did not introduce. And would you like to do that?
Sure. I have Jenny Folia-Jones, who is our Senior Manager of Communications, Marketing, and Government Affairs. And so there she is waiting.
So, well, thank you for that presentation. And Jenny is a great partner in the communications world. So thanks for joining us, Jenny. So at this point, Mike Matlock and I are going to pose some of the questions that we saw in the chat that we thought might need a little more explanation than what you can get in the chat box. And I don't know about you, but I was trying to read along, and listen, and sometimes the questions went by pretty quickly. So Mike, do you have a question that you'd like to open with? I did see several questions about communication with the school district. So I'm hoping maybe we could start actually with Executive Director Gibney. And can you tell us a little bit more about working with the school district?
Sure. We have met at staff on a couple different times on our potential proposals and this development agreement, really explaining to them, particularly because obviously they have interest as to traffic impacts, as well as in that island of their bus barn is in the middle. And so I wanted to work with them to make sure that they had that their operations could continue in a way that really works for them. I then went to the school board and I believe earlier in July, I don't remember the exact date, it was just not too long ago, made a similar type of presentation and heard from them. We have then been working with their communications people, Jenny has, to help get the word out about the, like this workshop and other opportunities to make sure that parents know of the proposal and can be engaged if they so choose.
That's great, thank you. I think that addressed a lot of the questions. So Mike, what do you have on your burning question list?
There's a question here. Well, there's a couple. There's one question here about how do we all square this with our climate mitigation plan goals? And that's actually a great question. Tumwater has just adopted a climate mitigation plan, and there's a whole host of climate mitigation measures we're going to be looking at there. Actually, what we're doing with having increased urban densities in Tumwater is actually good overall for climate change. And the reason I say that is there's a right to travel in the United States. And so people can freely travel and move and live where they want to live. It's actually a constitutional protection. So even if Washington State, for example, wanted to, we couldn't say, we're full, that's it, no one else gets to come here. And because Tumwater is a good place to live, and we have jobs here for people to come and have a way to support themselves, we know that there's going to be more people coming to Tumwater and more people in Thurston County in general. So by actually having increased densities and having more urban uses within an urban area, we are saving trees and vegetation in the rural area that overall will be sequestering more carbon by having responsible development within the city limits than if we were to start to ramp down and decrease densities in the city. That growth that we know is coming would just sprawl further into more pristine areas than we have already. So actually, Growth Management Act has been, without saying so, and we didn't know it back in the 90s when it was adopted by the state, it's been combating climate change really ever since. So it's a great question though. There's another question here about what's the city's interest in a development agreement. And I think maybe I'll turn that over to John Doan, because I think he has a good response to that. And it's always fun to up delegate to your boss anyway.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, just like I've responded in the chat, I mean, one of the reasons why we've talked about a development agreement, which is, I mean, the city has done development agreements and usually with a private developer with regards to how infrastructure is paid for and improved, or the timing of projects relative to infrastructure. In this particular instance, it's really because the underlying property owner will remain the port. The agreement is between the city and the port, and then we would use for the local government wonks who want to get really deep in this, we'd actually use an interlocal agreement to be able to adopt that development agreement. Is technically what's going on there. But what it really does is open the door to conversations about things that might otherwise be outside of the regular permit process, such as the use of the provision of 10 acres of land or 9.5 acres of land to be used for a community center or some other community purpose, or the trail improvements, or the overall layout of the street system. That's that's really what the development agreement does, is it creates opportunities to talk about those other things that are of broad interest that might not get addressed through the permit process.
Also a question here I see about why would Tumwater want to accept a freeze on zoning regulations for future developments? And this is something that's still under discussion with the development agreement between the city and the port. But the discussions we've had internally at the city and with the port, there's some value in having predictability in zoning in particular, because the city council can change zoning over time if they wish to do so. So there's some value to the port and to the potential lessee to have some predictability there. But we, as a city, we want to have some sideboards around that, because we know that there's going to be environmental regulations that are evolving all the time. And so at least from our standpoint, our interest is to not actually vest those, what we would call it, so that we can respond to changing environmental regulations for stormwater and the like. So another good question.
Okay. And we did have some question about endangered species and the habitat conservation plan. And I know it was addressed in the chat. It was a pretty lengthy response. So I'm hoping Brad Medrud could readdress that.
I apologize. Ann, could you repeat the question? I was reading the chat at the same time.
We had some questions about habitat conservation and the endangered species and what impact this proposed development might have on.
Yes, so for those of you who may not know, the city and the port are currently working together on the habitat conservation plan that is called the Bush Prairie Habitat Conservation Plan. It will address growth within the city boundaries. The intent is to protect the endangered species that are located within the city. The gopher is probably the #1 species. We also have a spotted frog and some bird species. The intent of the HCP really is to provide the mechanism for allowing development to occur through the federal process known as a habitat conservation plan, having that permit for take of the species to be allowed. At the same time, it is also allowing us to use that to get larger mitigation grounds than we would be able to get if it was mitigation was left to individual projects. Really, our hope is we'll be able to use that plan and all the development that's occurring in the city to leverage larger tracts of land and to have better conservation outcomes for the protected species going forward. Our timeline is we're looking hopefully to have a draft by the end of this year and to hopefully have a draft or the final ready by the end of next year. We're currently working right now with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get that scheduled to be met.
Thank you, Brad. And Administrator Doan, you have you are unmuted. Did you have a question or comment you wanted to share with us? Okay. All right. So we did have some questions about jobs, job creation, types of jobs, and a related question about who did the economic forecasts and the sales tax forecasts. So I'm going to ask Director Gibney if you would like to respond, and then if we have a staff person that wants to add to it, that'd be great.
Yes, I believe that was a company, David Toyer and Associates, that completed that. That was done at the request of Panattoni. So it is their product, and they have shared that with the port. And I believe that Administrator Doan is in possession of that as well. Did I get that name right too, John? Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would just add, there was a question about who's verifying those numbers, and I just commented that the city is working to review those numbers relative to the city's projected revenue. We're not reviewing the entire document, but just relative to city revenue.
Thank you. And Brandon Hicks, our Transportation and Engineering Director, there were, I know that Mike Matlock spoke briefly, but there were a number of questions about routing traffic and how those decisions will be made. And could you speak just a little more about the process and the determination for traffic to and from the proposed development?
Certainly. What we've seen so far indicates that at least the truck traffic is going to be routed to the north. There's going to be, I've seen some internal streets to the proposed lease area, and those would go to Center Street, and then to Tumwater Boulevard, and then to I-5, of course. As far as what impacts need to happen when, it really depends on what development comes in, because we're not really sure what the users are. And until there are specific proposals, we can't determine what traffic impacts there are and what we can require to be done to mitigate any impacts that happen. But when a development does come in, everything is modeled, and then we make determinations from that data. And did that answer it?
Brandon, this is Pete. Just to add to that, as part of this development, we would require, just like any other development, frontage improvements on Center Street to complete the bicycle path and sidewalk network out to Tumwater Boulevard. And we already know that at where Tumwater Boulevard and I-5, the interchange there is going to need some upgrades as a result of, frankly, other development beginning to occur throughout Tumwater. And this will contribute to that, and they will be required to contribute to help pay for that, again, depending on their proportional impact to that interchange.
Yes, and thank you, Mayor Comet. We do have a planned project for the Tumwater Boulevard interchange that's being put into our CFP. It is an old project that's being brought back up because development has come to life outside of this proposed or speculative development. So they would be contributing to those improvements, which is going to help the city's financial standpoint on that project.
Thank you.
One of the other questions I saw was related to stormwater, and the question was, well, if you're not using stormwater ponds, how will the stormwater be managed at these various properties? And I wanted to share a picture of the glass factory area on the port property to illustrate conceptually the kind of stormwater management I'm hoping we can achieve in this development. So bear with me, see if I can get this to work. So this is a picture of Cardinal Glass. This area is just to the east of the lease area. And the way stormwater, for the most part, is managed, these are two quite large buildings, over 100,000 square foot buildings where glass is manufactured on the port property, if you're not aware of that. And a couple of features that we're trying to achieve in this new development area are things that you can see in this picture, one of which is creating features like this where the stormwater can be spread out and infiltrated over a large linear area rather than in frankly, just an ugly square pond. One of the things I really hate, we're trying to get away from. And also retention of the more mature trees between the road and the building. Of course, what's missing here on this road is there's no bike path, there's no pedestrian walking area. And depending on the nature of the street, those kinds of features would need to be added, certainly on Center Street for sure. Whether some of the side streets accessing industrial buildings would need those would be determined on a building by building basis. But I wanted to give folks an idea of this is the kind of vision that we're hoping to achieve and as this development works out over time. And I am going to exit the screen here if I can figure out how to do that.
And it looks like we have a question here, and the question is, did the port consider the Newmarket Industrial Campus Master Plan that was put together with Tumwater before the Port Vision 2050 prior to connecting with Panettone? And did you discuss the planning process with Panettone? And I'm hoping that Executive Director Gibney can respond to that one.
Certainly, I can. And yes, we have taken that into consideration. I think the master plan has pointed out many of the issues that have been considered in putting this proposal together. It doesn't align exactly with how the master plan was laid out, and that's not really too surprising. Planning efforts of that nature often diverge when we actually get proposals in. But I think the basic tenets of it, of having a mix of uses, providing for some community amenities such as the bike and pedestrian trails, having a and while this wasn't particularly conceived of in the master plan, I think it meets the spirit of it, of having that mix of uses and then providing for space for the community center. So it was taken into consideration, and there are some divergences from that plan.
Thank you very much for that. And actually, I'm going to ask, we had a number of comments and a lot of responses about trees. So Director Matlock, is that something you'd like to respond to, or have staff join with you in that response?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it and let Brad fill in any parts I might miss. Tumwater has a very robust tree protection ordinance currently. We actually require 12 trees per acre, or 20% of the trees, whichever's higher, to be retained after development occurs or as development occurs. And that's a pretty high standard. It's actually higher, I believe, still than any of our neighboring jurisdictions in the county. So we apply that, and but you know, when you take into consideration building size and topography, and when you leave trees, when you allow trees to be retained, they need to have enough space around them when they're not so beat up and they're just not going to die soon anyway. So if you can imagine, you know, a lot of our building lots for residential, for example, are 5,000 square feet or less. If you have trees there, by the time you put the house on and the driveway, what you have left, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to retain that level of trees. So we have provisions in there that if you take trees down in excess of that standard, you need to replant trees on the site at a ratio of 3 to 1. And typically that's what happens. And we recognize that, you know, when you replace larger trees with smaller trees, that there's something that's lost there. And there's no doubt about that. But we're playing the long game here too. And what I like to tell people is, you go up on Tumwater Hill and you look out over Tumwater and Olympia, you see a lot of trees. So what we see over time is those trees, of course, grow. And we have a lot of trees in the city, and an urban forest is very, very important to us, and certainly very important to the city council. And so we take all that very seriously.
Thank you, Mike. I was just looking at the time, and we had promised you a 1-hour workshop, and I see we have lost about 7 of our attendees. So I think I'm going to go ahead and invite closing remarks from Administrator Doan, Executive Director Gibney, and Mayor Komet. And I just wanted to thank everyone for attending and helping us with this workshop. We will make the PowerPoint available on the city website and the port website, I'm assuming. And there will be a recording of this meeting available as well. So with that, let's see, let's start with Administrator Doan.
Great, thank you, and I want to say thank you to everybody who's here. You know, admittedly, we were a little pensive about how was this going to work, and you know, one of the things we've learned over the past 18 months is that some of these virtual tools actually make meetings like this more accessible and easier to get to and participate than otherwise. You know, I'm sort of scanning back through the chat, and there are a number of, you know, questions, and some of them are just, you know, statements or concerns that people have, and you know, they're more for us to sort of think about as we continue to move forward. I want to thank everybody for those. I mean, we haven't responded to every one of those because a lot of those are simply statements, and that's great. I mean, it's, again, part of what we said is we're here to hear people's concerns. I guess I would invite if Sam could clarify in her sort of final comments. There's two things that sort of stand out to me here. There are some questions that are sort of repeated about the size of the buildings and sort of how that plays out in your sense of how that looks like in a master planning process. And then I think there's also a couple of questions about, you mentioned the 500,000 square foot building, that there's interest in that being manufacturing right now. Could you maybe go back and clarify that a little bit also? Because I think there's some questions in there about, you know, is this really a project, or how big, and that kind of stuff would be really helpful. So thank you.
Sure. Anne, do you want me to go ahead? Great. So thank you. So in response to the question about the proposal from the manufacturing facility, the developer is competing for that that project. I think that they are think that they, you know, that they will be competitive with it. The approximate size be just over 400,000 square feet. And they have indicated that it would be a manufacturing facility. They have not disclosed who the tenant might be to us, but so that's what I know about that. And if it proceeds, I think that, you know, they might be putting in applications on that fairly soon. And then the what was the other part of your question, Administrator Doan? The
the overall, how will the square footages of sort of the overall project be decided? And I think there was some talk very early on in this conversation, probably a year and a half ago, about 1 million square foot building, and now we're talking about 2.7 million. So if you could just sort of clarify that.
Yeah, I don't know where the 2.7, maybe that's an accumulated total on that. It sounds like that might be the case. What I think that the concept is, though, however, and actually Mayor Komet does a good job of articulating this, is that the development will act as almost as if there's an anchor tenant that helps to really make the rest of the project feasible. And so there is a larger footprint identified in kind of the middle of the development. Right now, it's tentatively put in there at about 1 million square feet. Having that type of economy and economy of scale and the income derived from that would then help to allow for the diversity of other uses and other building sizes. So it is kind of, you know, mixed use, mixed building size, but looking for that kind of one anchor tenant. And then I'll go on further just to thank the particularly the City of Tumwater for allowing for this opportunity, and agreeing with Administrator Doan that, you know, it is a bit unusual to have a meeting of this type in this point in the process, and yet I think it's also very appropriate, and I really for the partnership that is reflected between the city of Tumwater and the Port of Olympia, and recognizing the scale of this type of proposal within the city. I just really appreciate the opportunity for us to continue to work through the issues together, so that we can realize a development that really helps us to fulfill our mission and realizes real benefits for the citizens of Tumwater. So thank you all for allowing us to be here this evening.
All right, and Mayor Komet.
Well, I guess I'll just close it out by again thanking everyone for taking some time this evening to listen to the presentation, learn a little bit more about what is being proposed here. As you can tell, there are some specifics that look like they're starting to shape up in terms of a couple of the buildings, but a lot of this is still unknown in terms of exactly how this will lay out, and the kinds of uses in buildings. What we're trying to create through this development agreement is a framework for how we envision this part of the city and the port property being developed in a way that's feasible and will be done in a way that tries to minimize those impacts that I know have been identified by residents as well as our council. And so we're continuing to work diligently on that. We'll be interested in seeing the port's first crack at a development agreement. I'm sure we'll be working through that with them over the next month or more on that. And again, our expectation is when we have an agreement that we feel is at a point where it's addressed the city's concerns, then we will hold a public hearing, and those details will be made available for the public, and we'll have an opportunity to get that input and make adjustments if we need to at that point in time. So stay tuned. This is an ongoing process. It's taken us a while to get this far along, but I do feel we've made some progress, and looking forward to continuing that progress and frankly, bringing this area that has been zoned for light industrial development for decades, having an opportunity to bring some jobs to this part of Tumwater in a way that will help contribute to our community. So again, thank you everyone, and really appreciate the comments and questions, and we'll continue to work this issue as we go along. So thank you.
All right, and with that, we are closing the workshop. Thank you.